I got in touch with our local paper, the Grimsby Telegraph, when I was about 12, and I said to them, I really want to come and do some work experience. But they turned around to me and said, oh, you're a bit too young, maybe try when you're older. So I think they thought, oh, we've managed to stave her off for a little bit. But literally in a year's time, I decided to get back in touch with them and said, you said to get in touch with you when I'm older. I'm a year older now. Is there anything that I can do? And then from there, really, I used to sort of go to the paper on my school holidays, at weekends, at breaks, write all kinds of content, including a little Pets Corner column, which my friends used to hate because after I wrote about one of my friends whose dog had a wee in his backpack, needless to say, I wasn't really the flavour of the month with my friends who had pets. I think they were a bit worried that I'd end up writing about them. And from there, really, it was just the experience building up of being in a newsroom, getting your byline out there. And then 17 years ago, I moved to Leeds to come to uni here. I started as sort of an undergraduate course doing English and media because, believe it or not, there wasn't really a proper journalism course back then, which is just staggering in comparison to now. And then ended up coming for some work experience at the Yorkshire Evening Post while I was at uni, and just fell in love with the place. I just knew from then that that was kind of, it sounds cheesy, but I just knew it was my home. Like, I just felt at home in the newsroom. It was the place where I'd always wanted to be. And I remember saying to my mum and dad, I was like, I'm going to edit that paper one day. And I think they were a bit like, here we go again. And then here I am, sort of all these years later, now editing the paper. So started as a trainee reporter, worked my way up to being a senior, became their campaigns reporter. So we had lots of weird and wonderful things over the years, including training about 550 people to learn first aid at one point. Then joined the news desk and took the reins of the Evening Post and the Yorkshire Post. And then, as I say, the rest is history. I feel like I've got the best job in the world, quite frankly. I love it.
That's great, thank you. That's nice to hear as well, like you sort of always sort of knew that that was where you wanted to be. Like you always sort of get that feeling. Could we go to Emma? That would be great.
I was smiling. There was so much of what Laura was saying was resonating with me about just always wanting to work. I always wanted to work in the media. I didn't specify when I was really young journalism, but I always wanted to work in the media in some way, shape or form. And that was the only option for me. There was no other option. And then when I was in university, same as Laura was saying, I was a little bit earlier going to university. So I must be quite a bit older than Laura. So I went to university 27 years ago. And again, the options for journalism as undergraduates weren't as broad then. So I did media and communication studies. And then just as I was about to enter my final year, a job came up on the Carmarthen Journal newspaper. It was a trainee job at £8,000 a year. And it was a 2-year traineeship where they would have paid for me to do my NCTJ sort of postgrad journalism qualification as part of it. So I was kind of, I'm in an eye going, well, I've done all my studies up until now. I've got 1 year left in university. And then I was thinking, but actually, after all of this, what I really want to do is have a job in journalism, and I want to do my NCTJ. So why am I doing my final year if I can get a job anyway? So I applied for the job on the Carmarthen Journal and said, if I get it, great. And if I don't, then I'll do my final year. And I got the job. So my grandmother was really dismayed. She was like, what are you doing? You're going to ruin your life. You're leaving university without your degree. But it was the best decision I ever made. I went to the Carmarthen Journal, where I worked for 2 years as a trainee. I did my block release NCTJ training down in Portsmouth. So we did a year's course in 10 weeks with 2 weeks of exams tagged on the end. We also did lots of drinking in that time. And then I progressed. So I did everything. It's the best starting ground, a local newspaper. I was so incredibly sad when the Carmarthen Journal offices closed and they started centralising things over the last couple of years, because I think there were 14 of us in the newsroom when I started. And when I first started, I was the only female, and I was the youngest within about, 20 year age gap between me and the next eldest in the newsroom. So all the men, they sent me out to buy tartan paint and to buy sky hooks and do all the things that junior trainees are usually sent to do. And then I remember being sent to do my first death knock, where to knock the door and speak to a family about a member that had just been killed in a car crash. And I genuinely didn't know when I was knocking the door whether they were sending me out on some of the fool's errand or not. And actually it turned out it was obviously quite a common thing to do as a journalist, to do the death knock. But I covered courts. I was a court reporter for Carmarthen. I was a council reporter. I've done county council, town council, parish councils. Then I had my own editions. And then I left and went into the media, and then I did a year for an independent television company, and then nearly 14 years at the BBC. So I've done everything in my career at the BBC. I started on radio news programmes as a researcher, then started doing some presenting, then went into producing, and then went into television. And I spent a huge part of my career as an undercover reporter. So I can point my boob at anything and get a good shot. I used to wear my hidden camera just in my breast pocket. And I had a brilliant time, but if it wasn't for starting off at the Carmarthen Journal, I really don't think that the opportunities that I've had would have opened up to me. So after nearly 14 years at the BBC, I went to Cardiff University and founded and set up and launched the Centre for Community Journalism, and that was just over 8 years ago. And then 2 years ago, we set up the Independent Community News Network. So that's the UK's only representative body for independent news publishers in the UK, and we've just gone up to 125 members. So so gone kind of full circle really. But honestly, best career ever. I would encourage anybody to go into journalism. It is absolutely the best job in the whole world.
Great, thank you. Can we go to Faye?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I agree with a lot in saying, especially kind of the importance of local news. So I always wanted to be a journalist, even started off year levels in around 2016. I've done a lot less maybe than the other two have, but I totally recognise all the things that you expected. We did studies and English language at AIL, but I was new to journalism. In the past 3 years, I focused on journalism at a degree level. I did confirm that I also began to teach television that Emma was speaking there. It was a lot of hard work, but it's definitely beneficial. So since then, it was almost that I was JBI here, which was covering Sunderland Echo, Shields Zet, Northumberland Zet, and Hartley Premier for newspapers and websites in North East England. I did a lot of work kind of around me. And moving on from there, where I am now is a lifestyle, something north based in Bristol, which obviously focuses on lifestyle, but also fashion and beauty.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? I think someone said that it's a little bit crackly. I don't know if the Wi-Fi is connected or.
Maybe if you turn your camera off, it might help. Are you able to just do audio, maybe?
Does that help a little bit more?
I think so. I heard that quite clearly.
Okay, I'll carry on.
Yeah, if you carry on, that'd be great.
Okay. So yes, where I am now from the regional newspapers, which is JPI, I'm now at Living North, which is a lifestyle magazine based in Newcastle, which focuses on lifestyle, but also beauty and fashion, menswear, and it kind of focuses on everything across the North and Yorkshire. It's really great to kind of cover such a vast area, which is what I was kind of doing at JPI Media as well. It is kind of, without having the knowledge of NCTJ and all the things that Emma had just discussed, you know, the death knocks and stuff, without doing any of that, it's quite difficult to even do the lifestyle pieces because you've got to have the knowledge of how to interact with people and how to go about things the right way, which is, it's important in law, but it's also important in just having a chat with people and doing things in the correct way. So yeah, producing magazines. It's a monthly magazine in both North East and Yorkshire. Been doing that now for around 6 months, which is great. But it's also quite difficult during the situation now. Some of it I was working from home, some of it I was furloughed. So during that time, I do my own blog, which is a lifestyle blog. I also have Eco Style, which Amy spoke about earlier on, which is what was my certification at uni, but it's now a lifestyle and fashion website based on, as you probably guessed, sustainability. So I've kept myself busy, definitely. I've also been writing for The Focus, which is similar to what you are doing during the pandemic, just kind of keeping writing going, which is so important now. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. And I'm back in the office at Living North. I have been for around 3 weeks now, which is doing okay. And it's a lot smaller team than what we do, but we're managing, and it's great.
Great, thank you. Before we jump into some more specific regional journalism questions, can we hear a little bit from Annie about your journey?
Yeah, of course. So I'm still quite just started my journey, really. I have just had my 2-year anniversary at the Portsmouth News. So I started having an interest in journalism when I was at school, but I didn't really do anything about it until I went to sixth form. And then while I was at sixth form, I spent my summer of year 12 literally completely dedicated to work experience. And I remember just thinking like, oh, am I doing the right thing? Like all my friends were off at festivals or on holiday, and I was just like, oh God, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I really enjoyed it. And it just made me realise that I just absolutely love journalism. So I spent about 2 weeks at Royal Navy PR headquarters in Plymouth. And then I got invited back to do a press day when Prince Charles came to visit. So that was really good. So I made some contacts there. And then I started working for a Plymouth Argyle Community Trust as a press intern, and I carried that on throughout my whole time at sixth form. And I spent about 2 days there every week in between my free periods, just kind of writing press releases and kind of badgering people saying, can I interview you for this or can I interview you for that? So I spent time doing that. And then from both of the places, they were kind of suggesting that they might offer me an apprenticeship, because I was really unsure whether I wanted to go to university. I absolutely loved history and I loved English literature. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to do journalism as a degree. So I was really torn. And then I just completely stumbled across the NCTJ course online. And I tried to find the nearest one to me. So I'm from Cornwall originally, and there was one going to be in Cornwall. So that was fine. I had the interview, got it all sorted. And then 2 months before I was due to start in the September, so it's around, July-ish time, the course got cancelled in Cornwall. So I was like, oh God, that's going on. I don't know where I'm going to go. I haven't applied for uni at this point. So it's coming to the September and I just didn't know what I was going to do. So I just found the next nearest course that offered the NCTJ, and it was in Portsmouth. And I just thought, I'm just going to go and do it. It's a year, see what happens. And it was the best year of my life, because it's from there I got experience at the Portsmouth News, and it ultimately got me the job. So I did the NCTJ, and like everyone else, it was very news based. So you're going to court, you're doing media law, you're learning shorthand, you're doing all the essentials in 1 year. And then I did a lot of work experience with the Portsmouth News, and since I've been really young, I've loved reading magazines. So I really enjoy lifestyle writing and feature writing and longer reads and real life stories. That's always the sort of writing that I was really interested in. And a position opened up on the features team, and that was the team where I spent a lot of my time, just because I said, oh, can I come back on this day? Can I come back on that day? And I really offered my services and kind of helped them out whenever I could. And by the following July, so I graduated from Highbury College doing my NCTJ in June, and then the following month I had the job and I moved to Portsmouth permanently, and I've been there ever since. And I've covered some great stuff even in my 2 years there. I've gone on a press trip to Australia, I've gone on a press trip to Mallorca to do some travel writing. I covered D-Day 75 when that was in Southsea last year. I've covered general elections. So even though I still do feature writing, I still really help out with news when I can, because it's always just good to have such a range of experiences. So that's a bit about me. But so I'm not as advanced as everyone else, but so I'm kind of just started my journey.
That's really interesting as well, about the travel aspect, obviously not just about national but also local. I thought we could maybe start with obviously regional journalism sort of in comparison to national. I know lots of people sort of are not sure what sort of route they want to go down. I wondered if you all had some thoughts about what made you choose regional ultimately over national.
I think that regional journalism is a really, really good starting ground. You get more opportunities to get stuck in and hands-on at a local level than I would imagine that at a national level. So I worked for the BBC for a really long time, and then I went to work for the BBC. So I was working for BBC Wales in Cardiff, and then I went on a secondment for the best part of 3 years down to London, and I was so hugely excited about going to work on national programmes. I was going to work on programmes on BBC One. And actually what I realised was that national programme, so BBC London, was no different really than a local BBC for people that lived in London. So the output and the programming and the journalism and everything you put into it is the same, except when you start on a local level, you really get to build up a contacts book. If you'd have asked me years ago whether I would have preferred to lose my contacts book or lose my right arm, I'd have gone, well, I know I'm right-handed, but I do have another arm. But yeah, okay, take my arm, because honestly, my contacts book was absolutely everything. And you get to know everybody. The tools of my trade when I started, I'm that old, with my notepad, my pen, my feet, didn't have a mobile phone, didn't have the internet. And our computers were so old, they were like a tall box with like a little screen on the top, so we weren't allowed to eat at our desks in case crumbs went into any of the system. They couldn't replace it because it was kind of, you know, old and cranky. In the very, very early day computers, and I had a colleague that was still on a typewriter. So I think there's a lot to be said for, I think there's two things. There's not just that it's a starting point and a stepping stone. It is a fantastic stepping stone. If you really want to get stuck in and get experience, then definitely start local. But also it's so important for people in those communities. We're seeing more and more reliance on social media. We're seeing more journalism jobs kind of go in. So the more you can do work on a really local level, the more valued that's going to be, because that's what's been lost. So, you know, we were, 12 to 14 journalists when I started on the Carmarthen Journal. Now there isn't even an office in Carmarthen. So if you can focus and do really well in the local community, then you can even set up your own. So I work with independents who set up their own news sites, and some of them go back into print and print their own newspapers and everything. So I definitely would encourage everybody to get involved. Go to people like Laura and ask for work experience, like I did work experience. I'm sure Laura can fill you in on all the opportunities you'd have with her. And I just would say, go local, get stuck in, your local area, you'll find out stories from your friends, your neighbours, what's going on. And I can't stress enough that a lot of journalism is based on a gut feeling as well. So I uncovered the world's largest ever timeshare fraud based on a gut feeling. Somebody told me something and I was like, oh, that doesn't sound right. And before I knew it, I was fleeing Lanzarote in the middle of the night with my tapes in my knickers, because I was like, your hands are going anywhere, but they're not going down my pants. So, definitely, if you want those opportunities to show you're hungry for it and to write your own stories and to get stuck in, and there's no better place than to start than on your own doorstep, I would say.
Yeah, I also think with regional journalism, like Emma said, like you kind of have the benefit, especially if you have a regional newspaper, that you kind of know the area and you might know the people, and it'll be a really easy way to gain contacts. But I don't know about anyone else, but I don't know anyone, none of my colleagues really know anyone that's gone straight to a national. A lot of people start out in regional journalism because it just gives you grounding. And I think if you went straight to a national, you are really chucked in at the deep end, because they can ask something of you that you might never have done before. But at least if you're in a potentially smaller newsroom with a not more understanding editor, but just a smaller newsroom where you might know people better, you would be more comfortable to ask questions and kind of get more advice. Whereas if you kind of just go to London, you're like, oh, gosh, or I have no idea what I'm doing. So I think it kind of would make you feel more comfortable if you have more experience at regional journalism.
I think there's something really special about regional journalism and local news as well, in that, the title that you work for is very much part of the fabric of that community as well, and you feel like you're really embedded, ingrained in there, because day in, day out, no matter what happens in the news agenda, that local title is there we sort of reporting on the good, so things like during the lockdown, for example, when it's all the really nice acts of kindness, or celebrating our health heroes, or looking at the really nice things that people are doing on their streets to kind of keep that community spirit going that's been lost. You know, we're there through that, but also when the big stories happen, so when you do have the big events where the world and his mother basically turn up on your doorstep, you know, that community remembers, oh, well, yeah, the Yorkshire Evening Post, they've been with us through it all. So the chances are they're more likely to come and speak to us than they are, say, you know, if one of the big nationals swoops in, does what it does and swoops back out again. You know, there's that real sense of connection. Like Emma said, if anybody was to take my contacts book from me, I would be absolutely lost. You know, it's that real contact that you build up, and you know, there's something that's really special, and it's almost a real privilege to be able to sort of tell the stories of just people who are doing what seem like extraordinary things. It really sort of, it is that ordinary people, extraordinary stories. And I think, you know, there's nothing better than doing it on your local title, because I mean, it's such a good springboard. And I mean, I look at some of the journalists that I've worked with on the news desk, for example, and a lot of the journalists, you know, they started at the local titles, and now, you know, some of our team are out there reporting for the big nationals, for Channel 4, for the BBC, for HuffPost. You know, they all get snapped up, and it does give that real springboard that I know Emma articulated so well there. So yeah, there's something really special, and you know, it's just an honour to be able to do the job, quite frankly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Laura, and in the fact that it is an honour in being able to do that, and it is a privilege to be able to focus on your local community, and being able to do that, it's so important, especially now for working at Living North. I know how important it is being a small business, supporting other small businesses and small people in the community that don't normally get recognised unless you go out and seek and find them. And I totally agree with what Emma was saying, in the fact that you do get all your contacts from there, and you do carry them throughout it doesn't matter where you go, you'll still carry all those contacts who you've spoken to, because they'll always fit into something else that you seek in the future.
Great, thank you. And that sort of leads on quite nicely to the next question I was thinking of. Sort of in terms of like national and regional, like almost how do they fit together? Do you think they, especially like during COVID, do you think that like almost what Laura was saying about regional sort of are really good with like personal connection? Do you think they do complement each other and work together well, or do you think there are sort of issues where they sort of clash, like in terms of, I know national, like say sort of news platforms sometimes using local stories without giving them credit. Do you think they do complement each other, or do you think there are sort of some like points of clash?
I think I'd agree with in the sense that I know that I've had some of my stories used in national news, sometimes giving credit, sometimes not giving credit, but they do take those things, and it is good in the sense that it gets a lot more of an outreach, you know, a lot more of an audience, and people, it's good because they can see our local community. If that's being taken from something I've written, say, in Sunderland, and now that being shown all across the UK or further than that, then that's great, but the credit is always really important. But yeah, it's sense of it's sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It just depends maybe on the publication and maybe on how it's used.
I could talk for months on this, so I'll try and condense it as quickly, as succinctly as I can. I've got really strong views about nationals taking stories. They shouldn't just take anybody's stories. It's somebody's hard work, and I think credit's great, Faye, but I think, you know, if you've worked for something, you don't just come and take somebody else's work. You should get properly rewarded for that work, you know, financially or otherwise. It's about consent at the end of the day. The issue that we've always had is that it's what's always happened. So you've always had that. When I worked for the BBC, I was guilty of it. The first thing we would do would, we'd go in the morning, we'd read through all the newspapers, then we'd have our morning editorial meeting, and then we'd say, well, what have you picked up on? Then we'd pick up the phone and try and find who we were going to interview. So we wouldn't replicate that story. Obviously, you couldn't just lift it because it was from a newspaper to radio, for example, when I first started, but we certainly would use it for inspiration to find out what was going on out there. Now, the issue that's happened is that as more and more local newsrooms are closing, and more journalist jobs are going, then some people feel that it's kind of easier and it's fine just to take somebody else's work. So in the sector that I work in, is the independent news sector. When people are doing, creating startup journalism businesses, they're not always like any other startup business. They're not always profitable to start with. So you've often got somebody that is maybe the only person going to a court, going to courts, going to council meetings, spending their time gathering all the information, writing it up, and then for somebody else to come along and just take that is just not on. So we're in the process. We had some Google Digital News Initiative money going back about 18 months ago to create a UK-wide sort of independent community hyperlocal news agency. So we are starting to put measures in place. If somebody creates stories, they press a button, it comes into a central repository, and then if any of the nationals or anybody else want to use those stories, they get them like a newswires effectively. So they pay for the subscription, and then there's a formal way of kind of using that, because the issue has always been everybody in that chain, when stories have been taken, everybody in the chain was being paid, and that's just not the case anymore. So you can't have somebody that's not necessarily being paid for the stories and then other people taking it and monetizing it, sometimes several times over. Sometimes another news organization will take it and use it, then they'll syndicate it internally to their own nationals, then they'll syndicate it externally to other nationals. So this is a habit that we have to kind of stop and kind of not just sit back and accept anymore. So if your stories as you're starting out just get taken by another title, then contest it. It's your work. There was a case that was up near Rochdale last year, where a big other newspaper took the story. They spent months on an investigation, and it was in civil court, and the judge had put it down to the sweat on the brow. So all of you that are busy writing stories, creating content, that's your work. And there's a slight anomaly in that there's copyright of images is perfectly clear cut. You can't just take anybody else's videos or photographs. But in news, there's the fair dealing rule, where you can't quite copyright news. So but unless you contest it and stand up for your work, then it's not on that somebody, I believe strongly, it's not on that somebody else just comes and takes all the work that you've been created. It's absolutely fine to offer it for free. I did loads of work experience. I wrote thousands of stories for free. That was my choice. I chose to do it. I wrote stories and offered them to people for free. That byline was the best feeling in the whole world when I first started. But don't let that become a habit, and don't undervalue yourself for your content. If you're writing good copy and good content, then there's nothing wrong with trying to sell that content on, be it to regional, national, local, whatever it is, So it's that fine line. Absolutely, I think it's really important that you do offer your work for free. Do as much work experience as you can. That's where you'll get to build your contacts as well, not just contacts in the community, but contacts within the industry. But I think that we need to have a value on it. And also there's a bit of a backlash, particularly we saw a lot of it surrounding Brexit, where some national titles would send journalists into communities, and they pretty much had the narrative. So I know in Merthyr, for example, there's the Gurnos estate, which is one of the largest council estates in Europe. They were sending journalists in at the time of covering Brexit, and they pretty much knew the narrative, and they were going down looking for the quotes, and that was kind of frowned upon. And there was a lot of backlash on that kind of like parachute journalism, where you send a journalist in just to get the line or the quote they want, and then they kind of parachute back out again. So lots of communities are now saying we've got our own stories to tell, and don't put words in our mouths. So I think there's more of an emphasis. I know that some of the national titles are now looking to try and get more local voices and local stories, so their focus is on getting local stories and raising them on a national level, without so much of kind of, and obviously we've got to think about COVID, where we can't travel as freely as we used to before. So it'll be interesting to see how this changes for us, in terms of nationals won't be able to send people into local communities as much, because especially when we have more local lockdowns and things again. So it's definitely an area to watch.
I completely agree with Emma. Actually, I did about 2 years worth of free work, and that was my choice. And like Emma said, like getting that byline is such a good feeling, and like seeing your article on the website and your picture and your video, all that hard work go into it. But you have to draw a line, because you can't work for free forever, and there has to come a point where if it's the same publication that's taking your work, you need to have a frank conversation and say, well, I hope this can go somewhere because I've been giving you a lot of my work now for free, and I was thinking that. So you have to kind of have some self-discipline about how far you'll go with free work, and then kind of really try and get a job that's paid.
And just picking up on Emma's point about national media sort of parachuting into local communities, I mean, a lot of the time, sort of local communities only really come in touch with journalists when, I guess, something bad happens or there's something really significant that's happened, and it is one of those instances where, you know, the world and his mother will turn up on the doorstep, and perhaps the experience that they have with a journalist might not always be the most pleasant of experiences. And sometimes, you know, there's that real stigma around being a journalist, because, you know what, unfortunately we do all get tarred with the same brush, in that, oh, you're a journalist, you're a terrible human being, you're responsible for phone hacking, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for the other. Whereas actually, you know, there's a real misrepresentation around journalists, because do you know what, especially with local titles, you know, we are kind of stakeholders in that community. You know, we live in that community, we love that community, and there's something really special about that community for us. So I guess for that sort of relationship and that balancing out, it's reminding those people, reminding our readers that, you know, we are here day in, day out, through thick and thin. We don't just turn up when something bad happens, that we kind of help shape that narrative around telling your stories, and please help us to tell your story. So that's something that we're really keen on sort of focusing and addressing.
Thank you. The whole idea about work experience is really interesting. And I know there have been lots of questions in the chat box as well about sort of tips for young journalists starting out, and like almost, I think especially with COVID as well, what experience, how we can kind of go about gaining work experience, and whether like how we can do that, especially when in like our local area there isn't loads sort of glaringly available, and also like the possibility of remote work experience. What are your thoughts on that?
So with offices being in lockdown at the moment, I won't lie, it is incredibly difficult in terms of how we operate from day to day as journalists. So if somebody had said to me over 100 days ago, do you know what, you'd still be getting a newspaper out and a website out from everybody's spare rooms, kitchen tables, you name it, I'd probably pinched myself, laughed a little bit and thought this will all blow over. But clearly that's not happening. So in terms of the actual logistics of the day-to-day job, do you know what, it is really tough. And I think, you know, one of the things that we're certainly keen to look at the Yorkshire Evening Post is, while we can't offer work experience in the traditional sense where, you know, you'd come, you'd spend a week, you'd go around all the various departments, you'd shadow people, you'd go into all the news meetings, you'd go out on jobs with reporters, it's thinking, well, how can we make that experience different now? So I know that Lauren's been really sort of instrumental in this with us, but we're looking at, you know, how do we set up a bit of I guess like a new column that's really aimed at sort of younger people who really want to break through into journalism, to give them that experience, to get that byline out there. So looking particularly for, you know, young voices from Leeds to talk about, you know, what matters to them, what kind of big issues matter. So then again, we get the byline, but in a sort of less traditional sense. And I think, you know, that's something that we as an industry need to look at, about, you know, how do we nurture and nourish that talent that's out there, and how do we give people that opportunity and that experience? And you know what, it is a challenge, and that's something that we certainly need to look at. How do we navigate around this through this time?
I think one place you're very lucky compared to when I was looking for work experience is that you've got social media. So I remember sending letters to local media organisations and television studios and newspapers asking for work experience when I was 14 and 15. And then the school sending a pile of people along with me when I managed to open the doors, which I was really frustrated about. I'd spent months kind of, you know, nurturing relationships to get my work experience. But I've kind of seen both sides of the coin. So when I first started, there was no internet. I didn't have an email address when I first started. I didn't have a mobile phone. Then I went to the BBC, and then I was doing loads of undercover work, so I had to be as kind of as discreet and didn't always use my own name or anything. And then the last 18 months at the BBC, I became social media producer for BBC Wales. There were two of us, myself and a colleague, Darren Waters, and we set up all the Facebook and Twitter accounts for BBC Wales news, current affairs and politics in Welsh and in English, and trained all the staff across all departments to use social media as a news gathering tool. So what I specialised in was to you know, when you ask people if they want to do social media, they'll say, you know, what do you want to use it for? And they go, I want to tell people what I'm doing. Actually, especially Twitter, it's the most powerful listening tool in the whole world. So if you set up Twitter, and you can do Twitter lists, and you can have private lists so that nobody ever knows you're following them, and you can just do advanced searches. So you can set up for sort of keywords, key names, key messages, key topics, whatever, and you can set it up within a 5-mile radius of where you live. So if anybody is tweeting anything on that topic within a 5-mile radius, 10-mile radius, 20 kilometers, whatever you want it to be, then you will find out. And that's kind of what I've trained journalists to do for a long time, is how to find people. So as BBC Wales, for example, if there was an earthquake in, I don't know, Shanghai, then I would want to know, was there anybody who's Welsh who's out there, then give us a local angle on a national story. So there's lots of things you can be doing. Use social media as your CV. And what you can be doing is, if you are, you know, sharing, even retweeting, if you're just a conduit for local information, even if you haven't got the confidence to write your own stories to start with, if you're interested in local businesses, local politics, local sports, local, you know, shops, whatever it may be, if you start retweeting and sharing, and then just tag in your local newsroom, you know, alert them to things that, you know, if they are going to be stretched and haven't got reporters on the ground and have got people who are furloughed, if you are constantly, don't bombard them, you know, don't spam them, but equally start thinking about things or something that might take your interest, and just contact them, DM them and say, look, you know, I'm really interested in this. And I would imagine that some of you have got, you know, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 friends on or followers. You know, you can do a social survey. You can do a social survey about young people, what they feel or think about certain things, and that's access that maybe a local journalist might not have. So think about the contacts you already have, things that interest you, and I would use social media as a really good kind of connector. So if there's something really interesting that you've written or shared, tag in or send them a DM saying, I'm interested in following up on this. Would somebody be able to guide me if I get this information? Would somebody be able to spend half an hour with me? And I'm happy for you to have the information for a story. So, you know, there's other ways of thinking about it, but you're incredibly lucky that you've got social media, and use that to kind of start building yourself as a brand, basically. And yeah, it's a really powerful tool, and absolutely you should be using it. If you're only tweeting about nights out and drunken photos and selfies, and yet you go for an interview at your local paper saying, I'm so passionate about politics, and they have a look and they just see 5,000 selfies, then they kind of go, well, actually, you know, we're not seeing any evidence of this. So use this time wisely and start using your profile to kind of really build it up like a portfolio of things you're interested in.
I think when I was doing work experience as well, social media and the internet is so easy because you can send so many emails within like an hour. So you can either send out your CV, but I always used to send, I had a group of counsellors that I'd always go to, and I would send out an email probably about once a month, maybe once every 2 weeks, and say, hi, like, is there anything new that's going on that would be worth letting me know about? And they'd come back with 3 or 4 ideas, and a lot of them would be worth following up. Even if it's a small story, it's something, and then you can send that over to your local news desk and they'd go, oh yeah, we didn't even cover that. And a lot of counsellors can put you and say, oh, there's a public meeting here or there's a public meeting there. And you can always go along to a public meeting and report what's happened. And when I was when I was training, I went along to a public meeting that the news actually couldn't cover that night. I think it was someone was on a late shift, but they were at another job. But I went to cover the meeting, and it actually turned out to be a really good meeting, and there was a really good story in it. And I filed the story, and I think from then they kind of knew that they could rely on me, and they asked me to go and cover a few more. And then I think that also helped me get the job in the end, because they knew I was quite reliable and they knew I was willing. So just try and email your counsellors or try and find out about public meetings. They might not be the most interesting stories, but it's definitely better than doing nothing.
Yeah, I'd completely just add on getting the emails out there. And it's when you're kind of in education, or if you're after education, you've still got those people help get to where you are today. And if it's not education, if you've got those contacts So people like us, or just that are interested, we're there to help and can give you kind of people contact, or if you say I'm interested in this thing, but people will know other people, and it's again how those but in a different sense to get those things out there. And it is a difficult situation at the moment, cancel. Even a bit earlier in violence out there, you can't get your work experience in minutes, still get your content time, which is good.
Great, thanks. Sort of on that topic of social media and technology in general, I've got a question sort of about, I know in other talks there's been a lot of sort of discussion about analytics, and like now we've sort of really got that option to be able to really understand sort of what the reader wants. Do you think, I know obviously national news outlets are sort of really capitalising on that, and sort of with their interactive visual articles, especially like with COVID. Do you think there is that option, I know especially in terms of funding, for regional platforms to really like capitalise on analytics in the same way?
I think analytics are really important, and they're there to guide you, but I think make sure you don't fall into the trap of just going on the things that get the most clicks, because, you know, as much as a cat on a trampoline is great fun to watch, and it might get you loads of clicks, it's not necessarily going to be what you're looking for to drive your kind of your article or your feature or your publication or whatever. So use analytics wisely, use them to guide you in terms of the kind of content people like. So whether they're kind of veered more towards, do they engage more with video content, do they engage more with, you know, long form, short form, what time of day are they online, so that you're aware of when you're posting. So these are all things you can find out, especially if you're on Instagram. Then Instagram, if you just switch to a business account, it's completely free to do. It doesn't add anything else. It doesn't cost you any more, and basically you get all your analytics as well, and that just helps you to know the kind of things. But it's also really important that then there are certain stories to do, very important public interest news stories that might not necessarily have as much of a draw in terms of that catchy headline. So it's your job to make sure that that is as appealing as possible, because we have to make sure that we don't just give people what we think they need to know. We need to give them the information that they need to know, not just what we think they need to know based on clicks. So it's a really fine line. You need to kind of be aware of both. So there's ways of tracking and keeping an eye, but I would absolutely say when you're starting out, particularly on things like Twitter, is about quality, not quantity. It's better to have 50 really engaged followers who engage with you, who share your content, who retweet, who comment, share, tag you in things, rather than have 5,000 that don't engage with you at all. Because the danger, I teach social media as well, just in case you're wondering why you should blethering on about it. The danger is if you just kind of get random anybody to just like your stuff, what you'll end up doing is having a bigger percentage of dormant followers. So the bigger percentage of dormant followers you've got, the lower the engagement will be on your account. So the lower the engagement, the less the social platforms will put you into people's timelines. So that's why it's better to have fewer followers with higher engagement. And that's why, you know, be really careful if you get sort of follower pods or likes for likes and all this kind of stuff. You'll get the numbers, but you will not get the engagement. So you'll end up kind of talking to yourself or the same pool of people all the time. So use your analytics and use it to kind of find what day of the week is the best day to post, what time of day is best to post. And if you're finding that certain things are really important to cover, but they're not getting as much traction as you'd like, then maybe think about presenting it as an infographic instead of just as a 5,000 word document or something. So just that's where you can kind of use the analytics to help you, and how do you present those stories in a more palatable way, because we have a lower attention span than a goldfish now. So a goldfish lasts for 8 seconds, and you know, when you go off this call, when you start scrolling to the internet and you just randomly clicking on articles, I promise you hardly any of you will wait 8 seconds for that article to load. You will give it about 3 seconds, because you'll kind of go 1, 2, 3, and at that point you get twitchy. By the time you get to 5, you're pretty much gone, unless it's something that you know what the article is and you really want it. So you've got to fight for people's attention now. So just think about that, and also don't keep sending people down a dead end either on social media, because once they've clicked on something, if you're taking somebody, asking them to click away to something, to an article, you've got to be giving them value, because if you keep taking them to effectively a dead end, or it's not particularly interesting, after about 2 or 3 clicks on an article, you've trained them to never click on your links again. So just really think about, don't go for that kind of clickbait headline and say, oh, look at this, is amazing, and don't deliver in the article that you've then written, because otherwise you'll just kind of lose your audience before you've started. Sorry, went off on a tangent then, didn't I? Sorry.
That's so interesting.
Myself quickly, sorry.
I had a point just about when you write an article and it doesn't get very good page views. I think this happens a lot. Sometimes you can spend weeks kind of getting people together, especially with me with features, getting people together, getting loads of interviews done, arranging pictures, getting video, like you're really proud of it. And then it will go online and you just see that it doesn't do very well at all. And it can be really frustrating and also quite upsetting because you've put so much work into it. But I think you're always going to get those sort of highs and lows. You're just kind of figuring out what people like to read. And it is annoying when you see like a video, like, yeah, a cat on a trampoline, like doing really well, and your hard work that's taken you days doesn't do very well. But I think it's just the nature of the job. And I think everyone, like every journalist could say the exact same thing. But I think it's just kind of learning what people like, kind of learning what to put in a headline that will grab people's attention, like SEO, all the stuff that you learn about at university or on the NCTJ. It's just kind of utilising that and tailoring it to your audience.
When I first started in our newsroom, the only analysis that we had to give us any guidance on our content was postcode analysis. That's all we had. We just had a number of copies of the newspaper that were sold in certain parts of the city, and that doesn't really tell you anything, to be fair. So I think, you know, we've come such a long way in terms of the tools that we have now. So we've got various different sort of dashboards that allow us to be able to see what kind of content's really doing the business in terms of page views. But then we also have some really interesting dashboards that allow us to look at sort of the levels of engagement sort of we get on our articles. So while it might not be an article that's done 10,000 page views, actually it could have a really, really big engagement score. So it's taking that into consideration. So it's pulling everything into the round almost, because we look at sort of where are our most loyal readers going as well as part of this. So, you know, the tools at our fingertips are better than ever before, and, you know, more often than not you just have to rely on your gut that this story was a good story. Whereas now you can really see the difference, as Annie mentioned, you know, if you just tweak or amend a headline, sometimes it can make the difference between it getting picked up on search or not, for example. So, you know, it's interesting to see where it's come so far, and it's really exciting to think, you know, in another 2, 3, 4, 5 years time, where are we going to be as an industry? I mean, it's such, if this is the start, then we've got something really exciting to look forward to.
I definitely agree with that, Laura. I didn't even realise how advanced things were until I started working at JPI Media, where we were actually looking at analytics all the time on every story that we'd published and how that had done, especially with loyal readers, because they're so important in regional journalism. And it was just crazy how that had advanced since I was in year within a couple of years. So you're totally right that in the future we won't even know what it's going to be like, but it is so helpful.
Great. I've got one last question, I think, before we move on to Lauren and the questions put in the chat box. A question mainly about sort of diversity. Obviously, with like technology improving and analytics, that's sort of one thing. But I just wondered if you had any thoughts about if the newsroom is diverse enough, and if you don't think it is, are there sort of what ways can it change? I suppose on a regional level, but also potentially like on a national level.
We're all waiting for someone else to talk. Yeah, I think it depends on where you are. I think it depends, all newsrooms are different. I still think we've got a lot of work to do. I think in some of them, even the balance of male to female, let alone when we look at ethnic diversity and, all kinds of diversity. The good thing is that with Black Lives Matters, that's really been brought to the forefront, but I still think we've got a long way to go. So lots of journalism conferences, for example, lots of panels. I occasionally am a last minute addition, and then I realise it's because I've got boobs, and that they don't want the famous manel, which is a man only panel, so they're quite frowned upon now. But actually, even having man only panels, male panels in journalism conferences and things, and I know we've struggled. At one time our team was all female, and we used to run conferences, and we would really struggle to get even women, let alone ethnic diversity. So we must, I think to say that we've asked lots of people and they couldn't do it or whatever is not good enough. I think occasionally it's just inevitable if somebody pulls out, but actually we need to think about, why do we have fewer options to choose from, a smaller pool to choose from in the first place? That is the same people and the same voices that get heard. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm delighted to get opportunities. Sometimes if I get my soapbox, I'm on my soapbox, and that's fine. But actually we all need to be doing more and doing better. So one thing that we can all help with is that if we're asked to speak somewhere or participate, is to ask who else is being asked to participate, who else is on the panel, and if it is all white or all male or all female or all, if there is no diversity in there, then we should call that out and say, actually, I'm not prepared to join this panel or to speak on this topic unless you have more inclusivity and have your own suggestions that you can say, well, have you tried this person? Have you tried that person? I think it's really important. I've been doing lots of listening and learning, and as much as I thought I was as inclusive as I possibly could be, I've realised that I've still got a lot of extra work that I could be doing. So I think even with the best will in the world, with all the newsrooms, I think there's definitely a lot more work that can be done and should be done, and not just within the newsrooms, but in the stories we cover. Because actually we've talked a lot today about, knowing your friends, knowing your community. Actually, you might only know a certain demographic within your community. So we as journalists have to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone and go to areas of our towns, villages, cities that we might not have been before, ones that might not feel familiar to us, but ones that absolutely give us the right give us the right voices. And that again is where social media comes in and helps, is that it does make it much easier for us to find the right person for the story, not just your contacts book. So I've gone from, whereas I would have given my right arm for my contacts book, now I don't have a contacts book because I use social media searches to find people who were there at that time, who are eyewitnesses. So it's finding the right people for the story. So it does make it much easier, and the onus is on us, is not to be lazy and not just to go, oh, I know somebody that can talk on that, or I met somebody last week, and thinking about, okay, well, they can talk about it, but are they the best person? Is there enough diversity in this story? Do I need to get a different angle or background in as well? So I think that's something that all of you should definitely bear in mind moving forward, that we've all got a lot of extra work that we can and should be doing.
And just picking up on your point there, Emma, about sort of gender and looking at that, there's many times that I'll get contacted to ask to speak on programmes or on panels, and people will blatantly say it's because we don't have enough women on the panel. And you think, this shouldn't feel like it's a token gesture to get a northern woman on a panel by just calling you up and saying, can you do this? And you're absolutely right, Emma, it is calling that out. I think in terms of gender, there's something that we've been really big on in the Yorkshire Evening Post, certainly over the last week, is we launched a new campaign called Call It Out. And basically the crux of the campaign started on the back of a lot of our younger female reporters in particular getting quite a lot of abuse on social media for just doing the job. So they'd be going out doing Facebook Lives, and there'd be some absolutely appalling comments in our streams. Some of them asking, one of them, she was wearing her underwear for a mask. Another one asking if she wouldn't mind just going to the shop, picking up 6 cans of lager and then going home and making someone's tea for him. There was just appalling, some of the comments, questioning, asking, is this reporter getting paid? Can this person do the job? I can't believe you do X, Y, and Z. So we started a big campaign called Call It Out, where basically what we are doing is looking at, as a social responsibility. How do we as a collective, as a society, look at calling out things like gender abuse, looking at calling things out like racial abuse, looking at just being a little bit nicer on social media? Because, you know, I think from a lot of the interviews that we've had over the last week, there's a real fear that perhaps maybe younger women might not go into journalism, or they might not go into politics, or they might not go into high profile roles as a starting point because they are a little bit afraid of putting themselves out there. So how do you make that social sphere a little bit nicer, so then people do have that confidence and they do feel empowered to be there? Because, you know, more often than not, a lot of the trolls and a lot of the anonymous accounts that jump on are a bit like, you know, it's a bit like being in the playground where you're holding the bully's coat effectively, and it's about us all playing a little bit of a wider role in saying, look, if something is wrong, one, reporting it to various social media platforms, but two, actually calling it out for what it is. And it takes very brave people to be able to do that. But, you know, I think we as a society need to get a little bit of a grip on that. And sort of touching on a couple of things that Emma had mentioned, you know, how do you make sure that you're truly reflective of the communities that you're reporting on, or the communities that you serve? I mean, sorry to pinpoint you again, Lauren, but I had a really good conversation with Lauren a couple of weeks ago because I was flicking through the paper, and one of the things that really struck me was actually, do you know what? We don't really have that many younger voices in print. So sort of like looking at, you know, how do we look at getting more young people feeling involved with the news, feeling that connection with the news? And, you know, it's up to us to actively go out there and seek it. But likewise, there's that, I guess, that responsibility backwards for younger people to get in touch with us to say, look, here's my story, here's my view is really important, and really embedding that connection. So I think there's a lot of work to do, but again, you know, it's a great, exciting opportunity to be able to do that.
Great, thank you. If we could head over to Lauren, we've still got a little bit of time left for individual questions.
Yeah,
That would be great.
so there's a lot of questions. I'll try and get through as many as I can, but if you haven't already, make sure you drop them on the comment box. But one thing that I particularly wanted to ask for like Faye and Annie, because I know you're quite new into the industry, like how do you keep motivated to pursue your career goals, especially because the future of the industry looks so uncertain? Like, do you have any tips on that?
I love my job, and I think that just kind of brings motivation anyway. I think there will always be room for print, and especially regional journalism. I think COVID-19 has really brought that into perspective, because people from Portsmouth don't care what's happening in Scotland with COVID, and they don't even care what's happening in London. They want to know the numbers, and they want to know the positive stories and the people they can talk to in their area. So I think, in a way, in a backward way, COVID-19 has helped that, but obviously with all the cuts and the lack of money and the lack of spending and advertising, it's obviously not helped it as well. But I think your sheer love for the job, if you're not enjoying the job you're doing, then you're never going to see your career going anywhere. So there's always going to be room for journalism, but I think especially at our age, we're going to have to diverse so much more, because by the time we're halfway through our career, or maybe towards the end of it, the landscape of journalism is going to change completely. I mean, I love print and I always have, but I think I need to get more on board, more kind of savvy with the technical side of it and the analytical side and things going online. So as long as you're always learning and you're always kind of accepting of change, especially in journalism, I think you'll be fine, because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, is that the industry is going to change. But as long as you can keep up with it, I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too, Annie. It's an ever-changing thing, and it always is going to be. But like we were just discussing there, I think print papers and media in general, to be honest, are kind of realising the importance of young people in journalism and what they can bring. And that's what motivates me, thinking, all right, well, I can maybe give this opinion or bring this to the regional news that maybe other people couldn't, and that is really important. But the motivation really does come from loving the job, and it is kind of, if you have a passion for writing, I think you will always write, because you'll always feel something or know something and find something out that you want to get out into the public. And as long as you keep that drive going, that'll always motivate you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And we also had a question slightly different about finding local stories, like, especially because people feel like they're stuck indoors, they're not like chatting to people as usual. Like, does anyone have any tips on where you can kind of source those stories?
I think when we were discussing earlier about the importance of social media, that definitely brings in a play here. Everything is kind of online. You can see everything happening, and even those people who there's some people that still can't leave the house at the moment, they can get everything they need online because it's the interaction. Obviously news is interacting, and it keeps between everyone in the world is so important. But by having that on things like Twitter and Facebook, you can kind of pick things up from that and think, oh, where can I get a regional spin on that? Who do I know who has a specialism in this? And that's kind of where you can get a lot of it from.
I think also with working from home for the past 3 months now, probably a bit longer, that you kind of realise that all you need is your phone, because as long as you can message people on social media, of course you can, and you can email, but if you're getting no response, all you need to do is pick up the phone. And we've had so many work experience students come in who are really apprehensive about talking on the phone, which I do understand, but if you're not willing to pick up the phone and get the story, then you're not really going to get anywhere, because we've managed to work from home for 3 months, but the only way we've been able to do that is by picking up the phone, because you just won't get stories quick enough through email and through social media, because people can easily ignore you. I'm not saying badger people and ring them all the time, but I mean, trying to leave a few messages if you can't get through, and then maybe a week later trying again, or a couple of days later. I think a mobile phone is really like the biggest tool to try and get a story. And I know it can be a little bit scary, a little bit daunting to pick up the phone, but once you do it a couple of times, it just feels completely natural. And at the end of the day, you're only talking to a person down the phone. They're not going to bite your head off, I'm sure, and they're not that scary. So I'm sure it'll be fine if you just picked up the phone to get the story.
When it is talking on the phone to somebody, you know, you have that initial idea in your mind of where you think that story is going to go, but it's not until you start talking to that individual and really tapping into it that, do you know what, often or not, the story probably ends up going in a completely different direction, and it's even better than what you thought it were going to be. So, you know, Annie said, you know, it's so important to have that confidence to do that, because if you don't have the confidence to be able to pick up the phone to a complete stranger, as an editor, am I going to have confidence in being able to send you out to something like Emma mentioned at the start, you know, to a door knock, to be that person to knock on the door of a family who've had something absolutely terrible happen to them, to be able to instill the confidence in them straight away to speak to you, to share that story with you, to get the photographs, to get the whole family album. That's where it gets a little bit difficult. And if there is the issue in picking up the phone in the first place or speaking to a random person in the street, it's exactly the same as that. So it is making sure you have that confidence.
I agree with all of that, and I used to get it hung up when I was especially social media producer. So and it was all new to everybody at the time. Social media was kind of, people are still poking each other on Facebook at this point. And probably most of you don't even know what poking on Facebook is. It was a button you had to poke somebody when Facebook first started in the olden days. And somebody'd be saying, oh, I need a Welsh speaker on this topic in whatever. So I would do my searches and I'd be fine, okay. And I'd be like, okay, I found this person. And then have they come back to you yet? And I'd go, no, I've DM'd them and I've messaged them. And actually, don't get hung up on just because you find them on social media. You don't have to contact them on social media. So absolutely agree with everything. Picking up the phone, there's no better way of contacting somebody. And just because you've DM'd them, you know, if they work for a company or an organization or a business or live a particular place, then you can find, there's usually a phone number, especially if it's a business. That is more difficult with people working from home at the moment, but a lot of them will have had diverted lines and things as well. But you know, what's the worst that can happen? They can hang up on you, or they can tell you to bugger off. That's the absolute. They're not going to hurt you. You're on the end of the phone, so just get used to. And I know that younger generations are less confident in talking on the phone. You're more used to texting, but you know, it's really important. There's a skill that you must have, is to be able to sit and just pick up the phone and be prepared to have a really good chat with somebody as well.
Yeah. And we've had a few questions from some people who don't have like a local publication near them. So they basically asked, how can you promote stories if you don't have people to go to? And also in terms of finding work experience, I know we've already kind of spoken about this, but is remote placements the way to go if they don't have like big regional publications near them? Anyone want to take that?
I think a lot of it refers back to what Emma was saying initially about, you know, working on the brand and working on you and looking at, you know, how can you market yourself? So do you know what, if you don't have a local publication, how about setting up a blog? How about sort of really tapping into some big, strong local issues that are happening on your doorstep to help build up that confidence for you to be able to write and get your name out there, but really focus on you as a brand as well. Because to be honest, you know, when people apply for jobs, you know, one of the things that I will look at in particular is kind of how has that individual marketed themselves. So Emma was absolutely right. I will be looking on Twitter, and if there are 100 pictures of somebody going out drinking, and like Emma said, they said they've got a real passion for politics, and you can't see that sort of oozing through their social channels, how are they doing that and how are they channeling that? So a blog, I think, is a really good, useful starting point, because one, you build up the confidence, two, you get lots of skills in terms of going out speaking to different people, and then when you go to potential interviewers, you've kind of got a ready-made brand there to be able to show them. So, you know, there are people who send me their links to the blogs and I'll have a little bit of a look through, and you know what, they might not have been to university and they might not have got their 100 words a minute shorthand, but if I can see that passion and that enthusiasm, that goes a long, long way. I can certainly tell you that.
I definitely agree with that, Laura. And I put together a multimedia CV. I was like, here's my blog, here's my dissertation, this is the effort that I put in. And it's kind of the drive that me and Annie were talking about earlier. If you do have the passion for it, then if you show that, people like you and Emma do realise, you know, the effort that you put in.
I also think LinkedIn's quite a useful tool because you can connect with a lot of people. You can connect with counsellors. You can connect with just such random people. And it's just a still good platform to kind of get your work out there. So I don't know if a lot of you use it. And there's quite a few mixed opinions on it. But I use LinkedIn as kind of like an online portfolio and just kind of discuss and start conversation. I think that's what's really good about it, is about issues. So I wrote a feature about staycations and like the hospitality industry reopening, and from that I kind of got comments and more connections from people in the hospitality industry who kind of wanted a bit more coverage, so it could kind of lead to other things. So I would recommend getting a LinkedIn page and just connecting with a lot of people in your area or people you know.
Yeah, that's all really good advice. And yeah, I think it's really important that you do build yourself as a brand. And if you don't have an outlet locally, then there's nothing stopping you from setting one up, even if it's just a Facebook page. Because there's a guy called Richard Gurner who was working for a newspaper down in Brighton, and he was trying to find out what was happening back home in Caerphilly and couldn't find anything. So he set up the Caerphilly Observer as initially just like a blog or Facebook page, and then eventually moved back home. And now he prints a fortnightly newspaper, has got a news website, has got a Facebook page, a Twitter account. So there's nothing to say that if there isn't anything and you're really struggling to you know, find work or do anything, there's nothing stopping you from setting your own up as well. And if you're not, you know, just be careful if you're not trained in kind of courts and the legal aspect of media law, you know, just don't try and run before you can walk. So stick to the really you know, community stories, human interest, you know, what's going on. Campaigns are brilliant for local journalism. So if there's a big campaign going on, whether it's for, you know, crossing for the local school, trying to, you know, new housing estates, something to do with a hospital, they're always really good things to get involved with. There's always two sides of the story, so make sure it's balanced. But there's lots of things that you can be doing. You know, Annie was saying there about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is really good as well. If you're trying to find information about particular companies, organizations, it tells you who used to work for them. So people that work for companies now are less likely to talk to you, but people that have left are more likely to talk to you. So, you know, you're lucky you've got lots of tools at your fingertips, and start using them. And you can even, there's I think I've done a little YouTube video somewhere, I can dig it out. I've definitely got a guide somewhere where you can, even if you don't know what the local stories are in your area, so you don't know what searches to put in, then you can put in into Twitter search, you can put in the longitude and latitude numbers. You can go onto a website and put in your postcode and get the longitude and latitude, and then there's a code you can put into Twitter search and to say that longitude, latitude, you know, within X number of mile radius, and it'll tell you all the tweets that are happening within the mile radius of your postcode. So that's also a really good thing that you can set up just to find out what people in your area are talking about. And you might find that there's 30,000 about coffee, and maybe the best coffee shop in your area is opened up after lockdown and there's 50,000 people queuing to get in. Or it could be that there's been an accident, or it could be, so there's lots of things that you can use, but they're just tools, and then it's up to you to kind of pull it together in your own way. So if there is a local outlet to share that information with, great. On our website on communityjournalism.co.uk, under ICNN there's a map, and there's 125 independent sort of really local news sites. So there might be something really local in your area that you just don't know about. So have a little look there and see if you can, you know, volunteer or set up or help with a local independent site. But if not, there's nothing stopping you from setting up either Twitter feed or a Facebook page just with sharing local news and information, and it can be a community group. And I think the thing that's really important, and people ask me all the time, oh, you know, on social media now, do we even need journalists anymore? And my answer is always absolutely, because otherwise it's hearsay, it's rumours, it's he said, she said. There was a brilliant story that happened in Talbot before, and there was an accident, and before you knew it, there was a helicopter, you know, somebody added, oh, I think I saw a man on the floor, and oh, I think there was a motorbike, and then next thing, I think there was an alien, and I think there was a UFO, and I think there was, and everybody's adds their I thinks and maybes, and they end up with something that's completely fabricated and not true. So even if it's a local Facebook group, when you're in there as the person that's kind of verifying and saying, well, I'll find this out, and giving the accurate information, don't underestimate the value that can add to communities if they are living in a news black hole where there's no other service as well. So there's plenty of things you can do. But as long as you know your limits, I think that's the main advice, is don't kind of put yourself in danger. Don't go running off, you know, trying to get behind police cordons and all that kind of stuff. Don't underestimate the value in just proper community news as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So this is more a question for Laura and Faye, but do local publications ever take freelance pitches? And if so, what is the best way to pitch them?
That's a good one. Yes, absolutely. I think it just depends on the pitch, to be honest, because, you know, as we mentioned sort of earlier on, it's how does it stand out from what's already out there, I think, is probably the key. So if you were to send me an email and say, right, I want to write something about gender equality, and that's your pitch, I'm going to be left scratching my head as an editor going, well, how is that going to be relevant to my readers? Like, what's the most important line to pull from this? So I'd say when you pitch into an organisation is, one, know the audience for certain. I mean, I'll be honest, the amount of press releases that I get coming into my inbox that you just think there is not a cat in hell's chance that this would ever make it into my publication, they're going to get deleted. So one, know your audience of who it is that you pitch into. You know, if you're coming to the Yorkshire Evening Post with a pitch, and let's pretend it's about a story in Portsmouth, it's never going to see the light. The second is to really spell out what it is that you want to achieve from this and where it is that you're going. I mean, I don't have the time to be able to sit there and guide you through every single story. So what I want to see is a really clearly thought out plan. So who you're going to be speaking to, what it is that you're aiming for. Do you know what, if you come into me and you say, I'm going to put in an FOI about X, Y, and Z, I'd probably want to know, well, what's the result of the FOI first before we even get that over the line. So I'd want it to be really clear, really detailed. I'd want to know exactly what it is that you're going for, and I'd want to know sort of what kind of impact it's going to have as well. So where it's going to go, what it's going to look like. And I think, you know, that's a really good starting point, because I get so many emails from people saying, I'd like to do this, and then you go back and ask them to elaborate on it, and it ends up being something completely different. And you think, do you know what, you've wasted your time and you've wasted my time there. It's making sure that you are really, really clear and specific, I think, is probably the key.
Yeah, I'd reinforce everything Laura said there, especially with being specific, because it's all well and good kind of sending, this is a big idea of what I'm going to do, but you know, you can't expect someone else to bring up the idea for you. If you've got a really great idea, definitely go for it, because I know that most people accept freelance offers if it is a quality, if it's going to be quality content, and that you can read the idea and think, yes, I know that that's going to do very well. The only reason it wouldn't happen is if you can tell that that person has never even read the publication. You can tell if someone sends an idea, if they actually know what the publication is, who the readers are, and whether it's going to do well. And you really can tell if someone sent an idea out of the blue. That's just not going to suit the readers at all. But yeah, having that specific idea is great. And if it's unique, if it's not something that's been seen before, then definitely.
Yeah. So I know we've kind of touched on this, but in terms of education and whether you think having the NCTJ is important, I know quite a few people are worried that maybe they don't have their 100 shorthand and things. Do you think that's really important, or is it more just getting experience?
So some of my best journalists, when they started in our newsroom, didn't have their 100 words a minute. As I said earlier, you know, it is about that passion, and you cannot put a price on having that passion and that drive and that determination to tell those stories in the communities, and to really, really invest yourself in journalism. Because I'll be honest with you, journalism isn't a job that you get into for the money. It's not the best paid job in the world, but the best reward is seeing your work, seeing your byline, having that privilege of telling somebody else's story. And if you don't have that passion, desire, drive, then you could be the most qualified person in the world, but you wouldn't last longer than a couple of years in the business. You need that commitment, and you know, you can't put a price on that commitment. And going back to the journalists who didn't have their 100 words a minute when they started with me, do you know what we did? We got them, we coached them, we kept pushing them, and they got there eventually. And there's nothing more rewarding than seeing that journalist continue to flourish, continue to grow. And now, you know, they're doing amazing, wonderful things, and there's a real sort of sense of pride around that as well. So don't let that ever be a barrier to putting you off.
That could be a lockdown project, going on and teaching yourself T-line gold. The only words I remember now are and, at, the, secretary and member. And at and the shortest words in the world to write anyway. I hardly ever need to write member and secretary in my everyday work. But again, coming back to what I was saying about, you know, depends on where you are with your qualifications anyway, is that if you're at that level where you'd be covering courts and councils, then I think you would be at that level where you would be expected to have a good knowledge of shorthand. But if you're not at that level, don't let that deter you, because actually when I was a court reporter and as a council reporter, it was really important. I only had that time to write down. I had to quote people exactly as they said it, because I was covered by privilege in those meetings. But actually day to day, you know, you can, as long as you tell somebody in advance, do you mind if I record this for note-taking purposes? Always make sure that they know if you're recording it and why and what you're going to do with it. But, you know, and people will be a bit more patient with you and say, oh, excuse me a minute, do you mind if I just type that up or write it as you're saying it? As long as you've got your direct quotes, I don't know if you'd agree, Laura, you know, it's the direct quotes you have to make sure you've got, but the gist of the rest of it, and even, you know, what they teach you at the start of T-line is just to miss out the vowels. So even if you just start writing and missing out the vowels, then that will help you speed up as well. But yeah, I wouldn't let it be a deterrent to start with, but certainly have it. If it's certainly, I still think it's an important tool to have in your entire armory of tools.
Yeah, because I stumbled across the NCTJ. I didn't actually realise how valuable it was until I got it. And I use my shorthand all the time. I use it because I actually find it a lot more time effective, because especially if I'm writing a long feature, sometimes I can be on the phone for like 40 minutes or half an hour. And then by the time I come off, if I've recorded it, that means I have to spend more than an hour going back through it to write it back. And if you need that feature by the end of the day, you're just adding time to your day that you actually could spend writing or perfecting your feature. So I still think shorthand is really important. And especially at the moment, you've got YouTube and you've got the internet at your fingertips. You can find videos, you can order books off Amazon to try and do it. They come with CDs. You can teach it yourself. I wouldn't say that you need a teacher to do it. So if you have got spare time and you are really serious about journalism, I don't think it's a bad way to use your time at all.
And the soaps were the best tool for learning shorthand, but then it's only when you start translating it back that you realise how really rubbish the storylines are and how flimsy the words are that they say to each other. So it can easily be done. And I still get told off now for doing my shopping list for my other half in shorthand, because believe it or not, you still can't read it. Unbelievable.
It's so handy though, Laura, especially Christmas lists. It works really well for Christmas lists. But I'll be the first to admit that I kind of did shorthand at uni. I didn't take NCTJ for granted at all, but I thought, am I really going to use shorthand anymore? Then I went and did live news, used it all the time, and now I kind of use it. I don't really need to with my features now. Like Emma was saying, I could definitely record it as long as you tell them. But I kind of force myself to do shorthand all the time. Like Annie said, it is more time effective, but also it will keep me going, and then I hopefully won't lose it for the future, and I'll have it for the rest of the time because it's really handy.
Okay, so now we've got a question on like social media. I know we touched on this, but what platform do you guys think is the best to promote your work? I know like Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, that kind of thing. And also, do you think it's better to have an online portfolio or a hard copy?
I definitely think Twitter, just because I think also on Twitter, obviously you don't want to post pictures of you like getting drunk or inappropriate tweets, but I think it's also important to kind of show your personality a little bit through Twitter and kind of what you're interested in, and retweet like nice pictures of photographers that you really like. I just think you should also use it as a professional platform to display what you're interested in and what you like as well. So I definitely think Twitter, and I also think an online copy is as well, because you can send your online copy then to just anywhere through email.
I agree, you're less reliant on the algorithm on Twitter, and it's all public. So if you follow somebody, I know gone are the days where everything was in chronological order, but it's still much easier to find and source and follow. And there is arguably like an echo chamber, like a news bubble of people kind of talk to each other within Twitter. On Twitter, but for journalists, it's really important. And actually, since lockdown, their stats are showing that they are having, lots more people have gone back to Twitter again. So I would say that would be my number one in terms of. But it depends what you want to share. If you want to share to show your interest and your passion and conversations and being part of the conversation, Twitter. But if you want to share your work, then you'll need to have that sitting somewhere else to link to in your art, in your tweets as well. So think about where you want that to be, whether you want it to be on a website. It can be a Facebook page. Instagram less so, I would say, for news. If you do tend to use Instagram for news, think about, particularly if you're running your own community or local news kind of site, then Instagram will be more for kind of like your pretty pictures of things that are happening, lots of user-generated content and stuff in terms of other people sharing lovely photos of the town and the area you live in on your grid. And if you think of your Insta stories, like it's the closest thing you'll have to a news bulletin. So you start in the morning and that you get 15 seconds basically for each kind of story. So start telling your stories, you can add to them throughout the day, then they disappear, and then the next day you start fresh again. So if you do use Instagram at all, think about your Insta stories more like your news bulletins, and then more your features and your longer form stuff happens kind of on the grid. But but I wouldn't say it's the most suitable for launching yourself as a serious journalist. It's certainly a tool, but I wouldn't get too hung up on kind of, using a lot of time doing that. So Twitter is what I would say, but think about where does your hard copy kind of sit, or where do your articles sit, and that you want to link to and share them via Twitter.
Okay, so I think we've only got time for like one more question, so I'm kind of going to combine two. How do you all deal with burnout in the industry? And also, we've picked on this, but like emotional implications of online hate abuse in terms of like blocking comments or anything.
I think when you go on holiday, you go on holiday, so you do not check your emails and you do not check work Twitter. Well, I don't anyway, and my editor's always been really good with that. So whenever I leave the office before I go on holiday, he goes, turn off your emails, make sure you signed out, because when you are on holiday, like everyone, you deserve a break, and use your weekends as a break, use your evenings as a break. So in the evenings, I really don't try and go on social media at all. And I think with hateful comments, you're always, which is sad, but it's inevitable, you're always going to kind of get some hateful comments under your articles. And the Portsmouth News have definitely had their fair share. But I think you just have to think that you don't know these people and they don't know you. So as much as it's hurtful, you shouldn't take it to heart, because they don't actually know the work you're doing and they don't know how good you are at your job. So they're just kind of seeing what's on the surface, and especially bad stories, so especially door knocks or things like that. A lot of people can say you're unethical for going to talk to the family, but at the end of the day, as long as it's in the guidelines and you are being ethical and your news editor's happy and you're not breaking any rules, you're entitled to do your job, and no journalist should get hatred or abuse for doing their job. So I really think it's something that needs to change, but I think you just kind of have to take it on the chin and not take it to heart.
When I first announced that I was the editor of the Yorkshire Evening Post, I did get quite a lot of nasty comments, just because, one, I'm a young woman, two, sometimes my hair might be a little bit pink, and three, I've got a bit of a weird front tooth. And people just seem to just jump on that and really start exploiting it. And it got to the point where, you know what, you've got a thick skin and you think, I should not have to justify myself to anybody else. I've worked bloody hard to get to where I've got to, and I do not need to sit there and say to these faceless people who are cowards hiding behind the keyboards, here's why I'm here and here's why I'm doing my job. Nobody should ever have to feel like they justify themselves in that sphere. And as I mentioned earlier, it is about calling it out for what it is. And, there's so many useful tools like the mute button on Twitter. I mean, I love the mute button, I love the block button, and I'm not afraid to use them either, because you know what, it can be all consuming, because all it takes is one negative comment and you suddenly start thinking to yourself, oh, are they right? And you know what, they're absolutely not. Nobody should have to justify themselves to anybody. So I would say the mute button, the block button are the most amazing buttons that you can ever press.
Yeah, you'll never please all of the people all of the time, and that's something that I've learned in all walks of life, whether it's talking to a group of fellow journalists, whether it's so I run an Instagram account and it's got 25,000 followers, which is kind of taking me in a different direction. So somebody was talking about kind of your outlets, and so my passions were editing videos, patching around with graphics, that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, when I was doing journalism and social media, it was also my job. So trying to find something where you switch off. So I started doing some baking, which was great, because I would do a really short project. You can make cupcakes within an hour and decorated and done, but actually your phone is down. So think about something where you are focused on something else and your phone is down. I find it very difficult to be doing any work on my phone and not have emails and stuff like that coming in. So digital detox is really important. But also I set up an Instagram account. So the house we're sitting in used to be a derelict crack den. It was a squat and it was covered in graffiti. So I documented the build. So again, more kind of Annie's territory with the kind of the features, and with Faye as well. So what I did was kind of documented it, and we've built up. And some people like what you do, some people don't, and as long as you can never please all of the people all of the time. And as Laura said, mute them, unblock them, or be really thank you very much for your comment. I've taken it on board. That'll really rile them up. But don't feed the trolls. If they're just trolling, a comment back from you is the oxygen they thrive on. You know, it's like that website. I mean, how it's still legal and go in a Tattle Life website. I've never come across such a vile cesspit of awfulness in my life, where, you know, women predominantly will sit down and look at public social media accounts. Any account that's not private, they class as fair game, and they just go on there, people they dislike, and then go off onto another website and talk to everybody else about complete strangers they dislike, and that's how they spend their lives. I mean, really, you've just got to feel sorry for them. But what I would say is, if it is something that is threatening or violent or veers into, you know, breaching guidelines in terms of any laws, then, you know, do not hesitate in calling it out either. You know, you have to make sure that you're safe. So don't let it, it's easy enough to say don't let it affect you when they're just, you know, arseholes that don't deserve your time. You know, it is upsetting, but equally, you have to think about how pathetic they are, that they're sitting there and saying things to somebody they don't even know, saying nasty things when they could be off having fun with their family. But equally, if it does cross the line between, you know, between something that you think that should be reported, make sure that you report it as well.
Yeah, that's definitely it. It's finding the balance between things, but you do, it's getting used to it. And yes, we shouldn't have to get used to it at all, but you do get used to it. And in terms of finding balance with yourself, it's kind of your weekends and your evenings. Once you're a journalist, it's hard not to be a journalist full time, and you do kind of see things, and you do pick up on things all the time. But finding, like Emma was saying there, with your hobbies and things that keep you busy, and just putting your phone down for a while, and your break is your break, so use it as that. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I think we'll wrap it up there. I found that personally really insightful. I feel like we've covered quite a lot, which has been great. If I know we have a freelance journalism panel coming up in the next few weeks, and also I think it's been asked, can anyone contact you if they have any further questions? Because I know there's been lots of like good sort of ideas coming up. If you could all maybe pop your Twitter in the chat or just say it now, that would be excellent.
I just made one comment at the end there. Is it Matthew Bird saying overcoming imposter syndrome? You've got, it doesn't matter where you are, if you know, got the skills to know the who, what, when, where, why, and you've got the time and the passion to go off and ask those questions and write it up, you've got as much right to ask those questions as anybody else. So, you know, don't think if somebody's been doing it longer they're better. You know, I can't even tell you how long it used to take me to write a story. The sub-editor would send something back to me and thinking, how the hell have you spent 3 hours writing that? And sometimes it would be a nib, which was a, you know, a news in brief in a newspaper. It might take you longer to write it up. It might take you longer to think of the questions, but it doesn't give you any less right to ask those questions. So just have the confidence. If it's something you're interested in, and you know, just go and ask it. Nobody's got any more right to be there than you, just because they've been doing it for longer. So yeah, sorry, I just nudged that in at the end.
That's such a good question though, and that is really true.
Yeah.
And it's so important to balance like work life and making sure that when you switch off, you do switch off. Definitely. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for giving up your time. I know we've run a little bit over. But yeah, so please feel free to follow Empoword Journalism on our socials. And if you do want to contribute, we're always looking for new people. We have a contributors Facebook page for all of that. And yeah, thank you so much.